Puerto Ricans have voted to become the 51st state.
But low turnout and the largest public bankruptcy case in U.S. history are just a few of the roadblocks Puerto Ricans face on the road to self-determination. I'm Malika Bilal.
I'm Ahmed Shabuddin, and you're in the stream.
Hi, I'm Keanu Sai, and I'm a political scientist from Hawaii, and I'm in the stream.
Just 23% in the U.S. territory showed up to vote on the Caribbean islands' future political status, but they voted overwhelmingly for statehood. The fifth referendum of its kind comes at a time of deepening economic crisis with steep austerity cuts to public schools, universities, healthcare, and pensions.
The opposition says the results are invalid, but Puerto Rico's Governor Pedro Rosello has promised to go to Washington to press Congress to act on the results.
From today, the federal government will no longer be able to ignore the will of the majority of American citizens of Puerto Rico.
Congress has final say over Puerto Rico's political status, but many doubt it will listen. Its future has sharply divided a society that's trying to define its identity and hold on to its heritage. Well, here to help us discuss all of this in studio, Kenneth McClintock is former Lieutenant Governor of Puerto Rico. He's also president of the Puerto Rico Equality Forum that lobbies for statehood. Federico de Jesus is a former Deputy Director of Puerto Rico's Federal Affairs Administration and a former spokesman for U.S. President Barack Obama. Juan Carlos SILEN is a law student and vice president of the Student Council at the University of Puerto Rico in San Juan. And ZULMA ROVIRA-PEREZ is a lawyer and a legislative assistant in the Puerto Rican Senate. She's also in San Juan. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Well, ZULMA, I want to start with you. As we mentioned, this was Puerto Rico's fifth referendum vote since 1967. So what is it that makes this one different than all of the rest?
Well, I think it's different because, first of all, the governor is the first governor to fully come out and campaign on a completely statehood platform. And given that he campaigned on a statehood platform and he won, he immediately took that and he went and gave the order to do this plebiscite. It's also different because I think that for the first time, a lot of people came out and we were very much open about we want to just end with our territorial status. And that comes from the 2012 plebiscite that we voted majority against the status quo.
Juan Carlos?
Well, I just think that this is the lowest amount of voters that a referendum has had since 1967. Only 500,000 people voted for statehood. Meanwhile, we have 2 million voters registered, and there was a low turnout. And I think that right now the country and the governor should be wanting to make the economy better and stop the cuts in healthcare, stop the cuts in pensions, educations. And, you know, hear the voice of the people that the 1st of May went to the street, 100,000 people asking for the stop of the cuts and better things for the people.
You know, it's interesting, a lot of different people online supporting this. Some people saying, for example, like John E. Mudd chiming in, saying a step closer to statehood. But is that accurate? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I totally disagree with the premise of the program where you say that there was a 23% turnout, and,
yes.
and Juan Carlos mentioned that also. The rules of how you determine the percentage of turnout changed in 2016 because of a federal court case that forced Puerto Rico to include many more voters that are actually actively registered.
Okay.
They required people who had not voted for several elections to be included, when Puerto Rico electoral law says that when you don't vote in a general election, you are removed from the active voter rolls.
Well, speaking of someone who didn't vote in the election, Miguel Garcia says he didn't vote because the federal government didn't recognize the process. He thinks boycott was successful given the 22% participation.
Yeah, but
he supports independence.
That's another story.
But
I personally think that the voter turnout was really 34%. because based on...
23, finish your sentence there.
From 23 to 34%, it's a big difference.
Okay.
And it's because if you apply Puerto Rico electoral law that says if you didn't vote in 2016 general election, you're removed from the rolls, and therefore the real number of voters today living in Puerto Rico is 1.6 million plus whatever amount registered in the past 3 months.
I would like to add.
You've started something.
Yes.
Zulma, I know you want to add something. I know that Federico also wants to add something, and as does Juan Carlos. I will just say, because Kenneth mentioned the premise of the show. The premise of the show is to hear what Puerto Ricans think, and so I like that we're hearing that. And I'll also say the official numbers so far are 23%, though I take your point into consideration. Zulma, what did you want to add?
I want to talk about the fact that this wasn't on a regular election day. If we take into account that from 2016, we've had two referendums that are outside the general election day. And the voter turnout in those two referendums were 22.5% and 35%, which is a normal percent for turnout outside of general elections.
Zulma, those weren't status plebiscites. Every status plebiscite has had 70+% voter participation in Puerto Rico. In 1967, you mentioned the first one, when there were 1 million less people living in Puerto Rico, more than 700,000 people voted. The last time we had an off-year referendum in 1993, 1.5 million turned out to vote. Only 512,000 turned out to vote on Sunday, and that's because people thought that the language on the plebiscite was illegitimate. The federal government had hinted that it wasn't going to recognize the results, and they were upset at the process.
The way that you determine percentages in everything is you have a base number, and then you have a number that you compare with a base number, and that determines a percentage. In all those other Puerto Rico status plebiscites, the base number was much smaller.
All right,
because they applied
I hear your point, but I'm afraid that eyeballs are glazing over all across the world. So I want to keep us focused. I hear the point, and I appreciate it about voter turnout and whether or not that's significant for this. But what I want to push on to is whether or not it matters at all. Because as you mentioned, Federico, the DOJ, Department of Justice, this is not fully sanctioned. They didn't approve the wording on this. And so now the results are in. Does it matter? Will it lead to statehood?
It won't lead to statehood, number one, because of the environment in Washington, D.C. and its toxicity. And Puerto Rico, unfortunately, hasn't ever been a priority. But number two, because Congress in 2014, responding to the 2012 plebiscite that Zulma mentioned, said those results were inconclusive. We need a process where the Department of Justice approves the language on the ballot, makes sure it's constitutional. And if Puerto Rico decides to participate in that type of process, we'll fund part of the plebiscite. The Puerto Rican government decided to enter into that process. The first ballot was rejected, and they decided not to wait for the second ballot to be approved, and they decided to go ahead anyway. And I find that very ironic, since a lot of people in the statehood movement complain that Puerto Rico's been a colony for more than 500 years, and the fact that they didn't wait for a couple of weeks or months really is unfathomable.
The ballot was in compliance with the federal law.
Did they certify it?
The federal law, well, Sessions, I don't know if you've noticed, but he's been pretty busy lately.
He's the only employee there.
Yeah, and, well, he has a lot of positions that haven't been appointed or confirmed. But the truth is that the ballot, we submitted it as required by law. They said, there are 3 changes that we need you to make. Within 6 days, between April 13th and April 19th, we made the 3 changes by law. So we complied. They said, you're not in compliance because you have these 3 problems. We fixed the 3 problems verbatim, and we went ahead with the vote.
And as you know, Kenneth, to your point, there's also been mass firings, so perhaps they've been busy. But not to digress, Juan,
mass firings?
Of the attorney within Sessions in the States, within the DOJ. So perhaps they've been busy. But in all seriousness, Osvaldo is tweeting, and Juan, I heard you trying to jump in there. Osvaldo is saying there have been memes that have been molding Puerto Rico's political landscape as the main opposition parties use them as their weapons to excoriate statehood advocates. He goes on to say, meanwhile, statehood supporters reply to their opponents by using social media as a tool for isolating them as part of the problem. Obviously, on social media, I could show you a million of them. There is so much division and polarization, which is kind of evident here. So I'm curious, why do you think independence is important and should matter?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the low turnout in this plebiscite, it's like the elections. It shows that the people are starting not to trust the main political parties in the island. And that's why we have seen such low turnout. Right now, we are at a crisis. We are at an economic crisis because we lost some corporations like 12 years ago because of the Section 936, and we need to be able to develop our economy and to inject our economy with our own initiatives. Puerto Ricans are entrepreneurs. We like to work hard, but right now, with the status that we have with the colony, we cannot do that.
And so you believe that independence would allow you to do that?
Of course I do. I believe that independence would allow us to make commerce with other countries. Everything has to go through the U.S. to come to Puerto Rico, which makes the prices to go high, to go up. And we have those kind of stops in our ability to develop. Some people think that Puerto Rico wants to become a state just to get more federal funds. And yeah, that might be one of the arguments, but I think that Puerto Rico should be independent and should prefer the independence so that they can clean up their house and do a great thing about developing our economy and
let me give you
better.
A very human example. You have more veterans in Puerto Rico proportionally than anywhere in the nation because Puerto Ricans volunteer more for the armed service for whatever reasons.
Because
as a result, I covered what you might say. I said, for whatever reason.
You say for whatever reason. Juan Carlos says it's because the jobs aren't there.
That's one of the reasons. And other one is patriotism because they have family who have been military and all that. But I don't want to get into that. And many of them are suffering PTSD or other conditions related to their service. Now we have an underfunded, understaffed Veterans Administration system in Puerto Rico. Why is it underfunded and understaffed? Because you don't have 2 senators and 5 congressmen to fight for those veterans, and they're suffering in Puerto Rico. And under independence, the Republic of Puerto Rico is not going to provide more funds or more services to those veterans of U.S. wars than are currently being provided by the U.S., and much less what they could provide if we were a state and you had a congressional delegation fighting for our veterans. So I love that you gave a tangible example.
Yes. Federico, I see your eyes widening.
Well,
do you have a tangible example that can counteract
that's a great,
why statehood is an answer?
Well, that's a great point, but let's talk about the economy, which is the premise that you started with, which is bankruptcy. Puerto Rico.
Talk about real people, not...
Well, yeah, I'm going to talk about the 100,000 jobs that were lost because the recession started in 2006 when Puerto Rico lost the ability to attract U.S. companies under Section 936. And that would be something that wouldn't be available under statehood. In fact, under federal taxation with statehood, the Puerto Rican government wouldn't have enough money to pay for public employees, or you would squeeze people out. Puerto Rico has its own tax system right now, so you either have double taxation or you squeeze out Puerto Rican taxes, and therefore the government would have to lay off even more people. That's real human suffering. There's a GAO study that the Congress did in 2014 that confirms it.
I think when you talk about, one second, I want to put this to you because you talk about human suffering. You're saying let's talk about real people, and I understand that a lot of your friends, as you told us, you know, a lot of people in many countries, when they have economic recessions, there's a brain drain, and then that only compounds the country's specific problems. With that in mind, I want you to listen to someone who's proposing a solution. This is a video that came to us from Sebastian, who says, we know all the problems, but maybe entrepreneurship could help?
We believe that there is a community of entrepreneurs in Puerto Rico that is willing to help and willing to take the island forward. I think there's a pool of talent in Puerto Rico that is very, very high quality and is taking the decision either to stay in Puerto Rico to create their own companies or to come back to the island and create high scalable businesses from Puerto Rico.
What we did was connect the Puerto Ricans abroad with the Puerto Ricans here in the island and create a channel where Puerto Ricans can directly support the local entrepreneurs. And I think that is a reason why Puerto Rico right now is such a hotbed for innovation and entrepreneurship. There's a lot of problems, there's a lot of bad habits, and there's a bad mindset here in the island. Entrepreneurs are fixing this.
So Zulma, there you heard from Sebastian and Alan. What are your thoughts? Is that true?
Well, you know what? I have 12 friends, which I grew up with since we were very young, and half of them are in the, well, most of them are in the mainland, and they're not coming back. They're not coming back because they don't have the same opportunities as they have in the mainland. And as to what Federico was saying, I think it's important to note that 34% of the debt we have is related to health. And if we are going to talk about the debt we have, 34% of that debt is related to health, and it's because 18% of our matching in federal funds, it only comes from the federal funds. So we're having to put 82%. So if we were to become a state, immediately we were going to invert that. So I think it's related. It's completely related. The economic crisis that we're having because of our territorial status. Because if we weren't a territory and we were a state, we wouldn't have to be in so much debt for financing Medicare matching.
ZULMA, take a look at the GAO report that says that with all of the taxes that we would have to pay under statehood, 100,000 jobs could be lost. And so, yeah, we would get more federal funding under statehood, but the economic crisis would be even worse fiscally and in terms of job losses. So, you know, what incentive would companies have to invest in Puerto Rico?
Yeah,
they have to pay federal taxes that they don't pay now.
An analytical failure of the GAO report is that they recognize that with statehood, stateside companies that don't invest in Puerto Rico would invest more, but they don't even make an effort to try to calculate what that would be. So that study
You're referring to the Government Accountability Office.
Yeah, yes, back in 2014.
Yeah.
They studied a lot things that were against statehood, but the things that they recognized that were factors in favor of statehood, they did not delve into analyzing what the impact would be. So I don't take, I take with a grain of salt some of the conclusions that they arrive at. And I would hope that now that Puerto Rico is officially asking the Congress to admit Puerto Rico as a state for the first time in history, that now they will do a more complete study on Puerto Rico's economy.
So you mentioned analyzing impact, and earlier, Zulma, you brought up the health sector. It's not just the health sector. People online are telling us, and we can see with their own eyes here. Sure. It's also the education sector. That's just one of them. Take a look here. This is via Latino Rebels, and I'm going to pass this over to you, Juan Carlos. But University of Puerto Rico students vote to continue strike and keep the gates closed. Now, we know that the school was closed for 2 months and reopened just yesterday. Clearly, austerity measures are hurting students. What does this and how does it play into this vote for statehood or independence or the current status?
Well, thank you. Thank you. There's something that the international community has to understand, that in Puerto Rico, to win elections, you have to talk about status. The party that's in power, the Rosello's party, they talk about statehood, and that's how they win the votes. But it's just like a political swindle. It's not real. Right now, we have $7 billion debt. We have a fiscal control board. We have huge cuts in healthcare, in education, in pension, and workers' rights. Right now, the university is confronting a cut in $500 million cut. It's half of their budget. So it will make the university less accessible. I would like to mention something just a second about entrepreneurship. The economy in Puerto Rico is based on tax exemptions to foreign companies. What if we give tax exemptions to Puerto Ricans and to nationals that want to make enterprises? No, they don't. The government puts more taxes. The utilities cost too much, and they don't get sufficient incentives to make enterprises. So right now we're confronting more important things that the statehood or the independent. I'm going to be real here. We have to try and solve the problem with our economy. I don't think that it's real to say right now that with a fiscal control board and with $7 billion debt, the Congress will accept us as a state.
Can I agree with both of my Skype friends?
I agree
with ZULMA that the government won the election because of their platform for statehood. Yet the current governor only got 42% of the votes. So to say that yesterday or on Sunday we got 97% of people, all of us agree all of a sudden on statehood is just a fallacy. But I do agree that with a fiscal control board in place, which is undemocratic, the status of Puerto Rico won't change until our fiscal crisis is solved. And so I think that another way...
Is that never?
No, not never. It'll probably be there for about 10 years.
Okay.
And so my view is that we should start fighting the austerity measures that the control board is taking, the undemocratic nature of it. And maybe if we unite behind that, maybe we could actually unite and solve the status issue down the road. But right now, if Congress forces us to accept this fiscal control board, we're not going to have a status change.
Kenneth?
If I may, we're on the
actually, look at it the other way.
Okay, so just
under statehood, you cannot have a fiscal control board. It's unconstitutional.
Oh, yes, you can.
So what? No, you cannot. No state has ever had a control board, and the 10th Amendment of the Constitution does not allow it in your lawsuits or lawyers.
All right, so for those who don't know, we have a tweet from N. Pagan Butler saying, another issue is PROMESA. An unelected oversight board has taken control over every economic aspect of the government. They go on to say the main goal is to pay every cent of the island's $70 billion illegal debt to hedge funds at all costs. Colonialism at its best.
It can only happen under colonialism. Under statehood, the Congress does not have the power to intervene in the fiscal affairs of a state. That is the truth.
Zulma, what about you? What do you think of that? That tweet from Pagan Butler, colonialism at its best?
Yes.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yes, no, totally. I totally agree. I think I agree with Kenneth here. This wouldn't happen if we were a state. First of all, we have triple extent bonds. Nobody's talking about that. The reason why we have triple extent bonds is because of our territorial status. And if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't be in so much debt right now. So yes, I think it's clearly linked. And if we were a state, that, as Kenneth said, there would be no way that Congress could put a fiscal oversight board over a state because they can't interfere in our fiscal activities.
But they're interfering
Let's talk about
$72 billion in debt that the courts are restructuring, and that process won't all of a sudden disappear and will become a state and the bondholders won't get paid. There's a process that will be laid out, and there's no way the federal government will allow a status change until that restructuring takes place.
Well, you know what? Even though I think it's completely linked, I've always thought that the case for statehood is a case because of civil rights. I think it is colonialism. It's colonialism in the 21st century, and it's shameful. And nobody should be approving of having a colony at this day and age, you know?
And those comments are being echoed online, but I do want to kind of bring it back to the real people for a second. Federico, maybe you can answer this. We're talking a lot about statehood, but Ali says, what's next is they will now be subjected to federal tax withholdings and still be treated as second-class citizens.
We pay federal taxes now.
Everybody. We pay federal payroll taxes.
But what about those concerns that, you know, they'll still be treated that way? I mean, when it comes to their very identity, you know?
That's a good point. So Puerto Rican culture is very important, not just because of our national identity, but because of the way that the economy in Puerto Rico is set up. So the laws of the United States are actually approved for American society. Puerto Ricans have a very different socioeconomic reality. And that point, before we become a state, we'll probably be incorporated. We'll have to pay federal income taxes. We won't have representation. We probably would be in limbo for a further period of time. And even that way, right now we're a majority in our own country. If we become a state, we'll be a minority in a larger country.
Right. So
Kenneth, I know Kenneth is dying to reply to that.
We're not a country.
We are.
Colonies are not countries. Colonies are not countries. Colonies are a colony of a country. If we want to be a country, we've got to join Juan Carlos and become a majority in favor of independence.
Sovereignty are two different things.
Okay, so I heard the two gentlemen on set. Zulma?
I'm talking about culture. Federico has been living in D.C. for a long time, and I know he feels as Puerto Rican as I do. So I don't feel that we would lose an inch of our culture, and statehood has nothing to do with that.
On the contrary, he's a cultural ambassador here in Washington.
Juan Carlos, I haven't heard your voice in a second. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's not about losing culture because it's about what we have, what we want, and what we are. We are Puerto Ricans. We're not USA. We're only U.S. citizens because of a decree.
I have to disagree.
There's not a majority of people here that wants to be a state.
I am Puerto Rican, and I believe in the American dream, as so my friends. That's why most of them left for the mainland, because they believe in the American dream. And we believe in democracy.
That American dream is where we are going to have to end this conversation. Last word, though, Ahmed.
Zulma, you saying you believe in the American dream. Miguel saying, I believe independence would give us the political power to establish policies in favor of us Puerto Ricans, develop agriculture products. On the flip side, Pro scientist says, I hope that the Congress respects the will of the people expressed through the vote.
Heated discussion. That's all the time we have for right now. But this conversation continues online with #AJStream. I want to thank our guests, Kenneth, Federico, Juan Carlos, and Zulma, and of course, our online community for adding in your thoughts.